Good evening, everyone, and happy birthday, America, the big 250. We are hoping you will join us to get a jump start on the celebration as we go into this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to celebrate the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence and the birth of our nation. We have many panelists here this evening, and they have thoughts. I'm going to welcome them on the stage. Laura Forkham, no stranger to the podcast. It's so good to have you, former president of the Independence Center and still current co-host of We Made This Political podcast. It's always good to have you, Laura.
Hey, Josh, thanks for having me. Happy 4th of July.
Happy 4th of July. We've got a full house tonight, so I'm just going to move along swiftly. John Giocaris from deep in the heart of Chicago, international man of mystery, working for an undisclosed, as an undisclosed tax attorney somewhere there. John, good to have you.
Josh, good to be here, and let me tell you something. It smells like freedom tonight.
I appreciate your repertoire of national leaders. That's awesome. I'm sure we'll be hearing, or you'll probably break out a Donald Trump for us before too long, but we'll look forward to that.
He's coming. He's coming. Just hold on to your MAGA hats. He's on his way.
Awesome. J.B. Shreve, closest in proximity to me over in Arkansas, just across the border. A good friend of mine, host of the End of History podcast. J.B., good to have you.
Good to be back, Josh. Thanks. Love the shirt, John.
Okay, I'm going to press my luck here and add the last two panelists here who have been having some audio issues with it, but hopefully we've got them here. Here's Steve Phillips. Can you hear us okay?
I can hear you just fine, though my repertoire of political impersonations are usually like 17th century Canadians, so you may not know most of them.
Fair enough. That's awesome. Steve and I have been on many a podcast together vicariously through our mutual friend Calvin Moore, who is not with us tonight. However, another individual who is on that show often, Kent Straith. Kent, can you hear us okay? Looks like maybe not. Yeah, you might have some audio issues. Kent, I'm going to go ahead and mute you. Hopefully you can join us here in the conversation in just a moment, but looks like you may be having some audio issues now. In the meanwhile, we're going to soldier on. Like I said, thank you for everyone joining us. Feel free to join in the conversation. You're welcome to post in the live stream. Look, I don't have a grand list of questions asked the panelists. It's a very open-ended conversation, but I wanted to gather for a number of reasons. One, 250th is quite a milestone. I think there's a lot of things we could wax eloquent about the United States, what it means to live here, what it means to be an American, what it means for America to be America. But I wanted to start here, and I mentioned our first panelist, Laura Forkham, former president of the Independence Center. I think a good many people probably who listen to this show feel, as I do, politically homeless to a certain degree. And I think for most of my life, there was a lot of ways in which my patriotism was not inseparable, but intertwined with my political participation. And for me, anyways, it feels odd sometimes. How do I celebrate apart from a political party, in a sense? And so I wanted to kick that over to you guys. And some of you may not feel that way at all, and that's totally fine. But I'm just curious how you're feeling about this particular 4th of July going into it. Is it more challenging, say, to participate for that reason, or is that just me?
Oh, that's a tough one. I'm curious what the other panelists have to say, but and maybe this is because I'm an inveterate independent, but I kind of look at both sides as I don't relate to being a member. And so as a result, like that's never really been a part of my 4th of July celebration. What I've been thinking about lately is mostly like what the historical context was, what life felt like in 1776 and the document that resulted from it. So I've been really interested in the question of like, what was the environment, like the physical environment and the emotional environment and the social environment of that time period, and how different is it from where we are today and what it feels like in 2026 to be thinking about independence and the rights granted to individuals. So it's kind of, that's my yearly theme, and it doesn't touch on party very much, but I wonder about everyone else.
I'll let you know, Josh. It's definitely, I mean, I feel like for the last month we've been barraged by media with constant poll after poll showing how American patriotism is at a record low, but it's also just completely so polarized. Obviously,
Yeah.
I mean, pretty much anywhere you look, the Republican pride is practically at a record high, and independent pride is about 50-50, which is a record low for them. And then Democratic pride is like down in the 30s or 20s, which is really low. So I think, unfortunately, even something that should be a unifying theme in celebrating America's semiquincentennial should be, a non-politicized, non-polarized event. But, in the age of hyperpolarization and partisanship, unfortunately, it has become sort of a red or blue thing. And for me personally, I actually felt compelled to write a column. I just published it this morning, identifying the top 10 reasons why I believe America is still the greatest country on earth. And if anything, I think the 10 reasons I listed serve as a reminder of the things that is very easy to forget or take for granted, especially, in an age of just nonstop negative news. So I almost, feel compelled to defend, America on its 250th anniversary and illustrate why it's actually like still the best thing on earth and still the best thing going. And I mean, the fact that I feel like I have to do that I think is kind of a sad state of affairs in terms of where we are now. But that's pretty much where I'm coming from.
Yeah, I've been doing a deep dive this year over at the End of History, a podcast just on American history. I've been the 250th anniversary. I wanted to put something out there. So just a deep dive on the history of America. And to me, just the present context, I'm just kind of interested, like just curious. I feel, politically homeless, like what you said, Josh, but I find it's interesting. I'm just observing, just watching as far as the present goes. But from the history perspective, like there's a lot of problems. I'm not going to win any contest for being the most patriotic person. I can guarantee that. However, when I look on the history, especially when I dig into it, it's like July 4th, the Declaration of Independence, 1776. There is something special there. I can't think of any nation before us who founded itself not on the basis of the law. Like if you go to court, they're going to cite constitutional law. They're going to, if you go into state legislatures, it's the Constitution they're going to refer to. But what we're celebrating on the 4th is the moral foundation. We the people, or not we the people, all men are created equal is the foundation there. And it's like, that's impressive. And I can't think of any nation before us that did that. I think there were nations after us that mimicked that, and that was an inspiration for a lot of people. And I think that is something to be proud of, to establish a moral grounding that the law could work from after that with the Constitution 11 years later.
I appreciate the insight. Steve and Kent, unfortunately, appear to still be having technical issues. I want to
I think you can hear me okay?
Oh, yes,
Okay,
I can.
hear me.
Steve. Yeah,
Hey.
I was afraid people were going to assume I was just preventing the two left of center guests from speaking this evening.
Well, no. So, to John's point about, being prideful and as a conservative, as a liberal, we're never proud of ourselves. We are the party of self-deprecation. We're constantly figuring out all the things we're doing wrong, and we're never really high on ourselves. It's kind of our shtick. It's what we do. But I'm not particularly the most patriotic person either, probably. I'm going to steal something from Winston Churchill, twist it, bastardize it. America is probably the worst country that's ever existed, except for all the other countries. And so, and I think that is just being able to say that is the mark of American exceptionalism, because actually it's not exceptionalism, it's privilege. I have the privilege of saying that because I live here. And there are a lot of people that wish they could live here. There's a lot of people that wish they could have the country that we live in. There's a lot of people all over the world that try to emigrate here. And because we have something going that they don't have going. So, like I said, I can critique all of the warts. I can do all those things from the inside because I've kind of got the privilege of being on the inside, which I acknowledge. But I don't think that removes the fact that all men are created equal is a great idea. We're still so far from achieving anything that close. I like that we're working towards it. I think that we have to remember that there's a lot of potential here, and we're not even close to achieving it yet, though.
I'm kind of curious here. I'm going to ask a question that I have no idea if anybody on the panel has a firm opinion of this or not. But Laura, you put this in my mind about trying to go back to the headspace, if you will, of the founding generation, what they were thinking at the time. I think we are guilty for completely understandable reasons in this present moment of sort of presuming that they thought about the Declaration of Independence and our founding the same way we do. Or the same way that when we crack open a history book or something and think about it in that degree. Steve just mentioned all men are created equal. And I thought it was interesting because I was listening to a podcast earlier today talking about back in the day, the really important part of the Declaration, as far as everybody was concerned, was the right to separate from a people. And then the declaration that we are, in fact, independent. And it's not that all men are created equal was, say, unimportant. It's just that's not what they hung their hats on. And maybe one could argue it wasn't until you get to Abraham Lincoln, he really sort of reintroduced us to that proposition and, reinvigorated or rescued it, perhaps. But I'm curious here if any of you could enlighten me, let's say, on what looking back at the founding era could teach us, how they saw it different, good or bad. Like I like the fact that we focus on the all men are created equal over the maybe just the right to separate from a government. But how would they have seen the Declaration perhaps different than we do? What has been lost that needs to be rescued?
I'll take that first. I think one of the biggest things that people forget about the founding era is that a lot of people seem to talk about the founders as if they were a monolithic entity. They were in agreement on everything. I mean, there were some serious divisions and disagreements over everything from how to establish the republic to they used to call them factions back then, whether factions or political parties were bad. A lot of founding fathers saw that coming and saw that as being a really bad thing, leading to a lot of hyperpolarization and division in this country. So, it's obviously disagreement and debate is nothing new to this country. It's always been there. In terms of, how the founders might have looked at things differently, given how far we've come now. I mean, on the one hand, I think they would be astonished at how much America has accomplished in 250 years, particularly on fulfilling its potential on declaring that all men are created equal. I think, obviously it took a bloody civil war and another 100-year battle of civil rights, progress and debates. But where we are now is, I think a pretty prideful place to be in, given how we had to get here. But on the other hand, I think they would also be pretty, I don't want to say horrified, but quite astonished at how big the federal government has grown at the same time. I do not think they would recognize the federal government of today with the federal government that was established some 238 years ago. But yeah.
I think there's something to be said, though, about, there's the idea of that some of the things that we look today that we're very prideful about, this idea of independence, of individual liberties. We cite the Bill of Rights, and there's, I think, enough literature out there to show that the founders, at least the ones that came along after the revolution in the late 1780s, they weren't really thinking about individual rights. They were looking at how can we compete with Europe? How can we keep our ships safe on the open seas? How can we stop individual states from creating different treaties with different countries? How can we defend ourselves? How can we deal with this debt? So the idea of this, I think maybe it was more Abraham Lincoln, where we started getting this idea of, individuality, individual rights, individual liberty as being what the founders were focused on. I think is kind of far from what they were actually focused on. They were actually focused on getting a union going, getting a peace pact, if you will, between individual states so that we weren't spending all of our time fighting with each other. I think the idea of these individual liberties and some of the things we take pride in now were not really at the forefront of what was happening at the time of the Constitution. Now, maybe it was romantic idea during the Revolutionary War, but I don't think it was necessarily on first and foremost in people's minds as they were sitting down at the Constitutional Convention.
It may be a fair point, Steve, but I'm thinking trying to wed what you just said to what John had opened with. It might depend on which founder we're talking about. I mean, certainly Thomas Paine and Thomas Jefferson, I think, would have been more, dare I say, romantic about individual rights than maybe a Alexander Hamilton.
I think Madison was on both sides, depending on when you talk to him.
Yeah,
Madison's really cool because he can wedge him in between Hamilton and Jefferson.
Jefferson's interesting or sinister, depending on how you look at it, and that he would paint this high ideal of all men are created equal, and then do so much that was the opposite, which to me captures so much of what America is. We have these high ideals, these images of what we call ourselves, what we think we are, what we declare ourselves to be, and then there's so much that's the opposite of what actually is. And I think that's part of the struggle between left and right politics that's included within the American story all the way through. But I think it's interesting that it's Jefferson that kind of makes that the icon of everything, beginning with the Declaration of Independence, beginning with republicanism in the Revolution of 1800, even when he came into office. And there's a great book. It's called American Scripture. I think it's Pauline Maier, but it's on the Declaration of Independence and just the formation of that book. And she describes how it wasn't really until 1826, the 50th anniversary of the country, when the preamble of the Declaration of Independence really started being brought up. Like before that, it was the grievances against the king, and that was what people focused on. That's what they celebrated. And then that next generation, 1826, they get there at the 50th anniversary, and that's when a lot of the founders began to be mythologized, raised up into borderline godlike status, where it's just like these people aren't even real anymore. And of course, there's the famous death, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, on the same day, July 4th, 1776. All of these things that kind of helped foster American exceptionalism tied into that mythology. And that's where the preamble began to be the thing that they would read in the town squares and celebrate. And Thomas Jefferson was seen more as a prophet by that point in time, when in the original inception, John Adams thought he had already declared independence. Writing the document was just kind of a secondary thing. Why don't we have the guy from Virginia to do that? And so that was the way it was all set up. And it was almost by accident that a legend is created. And so much of America seems to be, that's the story. We like to think it was all on purpose, but there was a lot of accidents here.
Yeah. And I think what's striking is that the story we tell is a really oversimplified one, right? Whether it is assuming that the founders are a monolith in terms of their views, or assuming even as individuals that they were these visionaries of human rights and the way that we conceive of individual rights today. And, it's all complicated, right? Like all of the stories are more complicated than we tend to tell ourselves. And to me, that's like the biggest opportunity for us to kind of salvage something from our national history and our like shared history is to say like all of this is more complex than the stories that we maybe tend towards.
So I want to take us in a slightly different direction. John, you had mentioned earlier about how, and I think you're right, our politics is so partisan these days that you do see a sense in which there's almost like a malaise among the left and this rabid celebration among the right, to a degree, obviously. And as I kind of open with, sometimes those of us who are politically homeless, still very conservative, but politically homeless, has a hard time knowing how to plug into that. It's easier, I suppose, to celebrate 250 years when your team, say, is in power and is actually the ones in charge of the celebration. And then, of course, you can get into this scenario where you've got people setting up alternative celebrations. And I'm I'm bringing this up because I recently recorded, the episode hadn't been released yet, but I recently recorded a conversation with Dr. Bradley Berzer about a book he wrote about the Declaration of Independence. No one on this call presumably would have remembered the celebration at 100, or I guess it would be 200 years, 1976. But he talked about, that was the era of Malay America. It was Jimmy Carter. America was experiencing bad inflation. It was an open question: are we going to lose the Cold War? The Iranians
Crisis of confidence.
Crisis of confidence, right? I mean, what a time for this celebration to go on. And Grant, he was a lot younger, and he says that could have been kind of coloring my vision. I wasn't as aware of the world, but he says, from what I can remember, there was just an air of celebration all over the place. And it was trans-political. It wasn't left or right. It wasn't Democrat or wasn't Republican. And it was mostly local, he said. It was sort of like each town or city, everybody was sort of doing their own thing. And maybe there's a bit of that going on now, but I'm wondering, much like everything else in our world, it seems like we've collapsed into politics being sort of two-sided, and then the world exploding. All of a sudden, I get to hear about the craziest things going on in every part of the country. And so we have the privilege on this panel of having, all five of us are in a slightly different part of the country. I'm just curious, what's going on in your neck of the woods? Are there local celebrations? Do you feel that spirit of 76 in the air? Or do you feel the malaise of the 1970s? Or do you feel kind of the current dumpster fire of our present moment?
That's a really good question. I'll tell you something. So this year, my wife and we have a 16-month-old boy, and we decided we were going to stay within the city of Chicago for the 4th this year. And the night of the 3rd, tomorrow night, we're doing a fireworks cruise at Navy Pier. So that's something. But I got to tell you, I was looking around on the 4th to see if there are any family-friendly things at least I can take him to. I can tell you that in Chicago, there's a lot of partying and a lot of drinking going on, believe it or not. So that's a good thing. But as far as family-friendly options, it's very limited. The only thing we could find was the Chicago History Museum is actually doing some pretty cool things for the 4th, on the 4th. So we can take our boy to that. But beyond that, I can tell you the Chicago suburbs are a completely different story. In the Chicago suburbs, they got parades going on everywhere, fireworks shows, barbecue, everything. But in the city of Chicago, it's kind of slim pickings, honestly. It's felt a little weird.
I'm spending July 4th in Washington, but Washington, North Carolina, not Washington, D.C. And I actually picked the part of the country that we're in specifically because we're on the coastal towns of North Carolina, not the beach, but the inland port areas. Edenton, we were in Bath today. Bath was founded in like 1705. And I brought my kids here because I wanted us to kind of like be in this mindset of a very different historical time. What life was like for early Americans. So there are fireworks here in this very tiny port town. And the thing I love about the 4th of July is that it doesn't even, this can't be a federal holiday. Because it's really, it's us with our neighbors and our communities. This is federalism at its finest is how we're going to celebrate 250 years with the people that we actually live with. And the national culture, I think, it matters, but it's very hard to have a national celebration, right? It's really us with our communities, and that is the experiment, and that is what is exceptional in my point of view.
I am going from here to a fireworks show in our local town, small town. As I told Josh before we jumped on, I'm pretty sure they use the taxes every year. Instead of putting it into paved roads, they put it into fireworks, which we really enjoy on July 4th. We disapprove it the rest of the year, but it's the same thing we do every year. And I did feel like I thought the 250th would be a bigger deal locally. I'm in MAGA land. I'm not MAGA, but I'm in MAGA land, and this is deep, dark red country as far as that's all concerned. Now, granted, I don't watch television news. I only read my news. So maybe I would be more in tune with a lot more going on if I did, but it just feels like it's not as big a deal as I thought it would be this year.
Yeah, I don't really. So we go. I think so. For those of you who understand where Frankenmuth, Michigan is, I don't know if anyone knows where Frankenmuth is. It's this Christmas capital of, I don't know, North America.
I've
And
heard
so
of
we go.
Michigan.
You've heard of Michigan. It
Yeah.
looks like a, yeah. You've seen, right?
Looks like a baseball glove.
Yeah. There's a glove, right? And so it's this, Christmas mecca. Anyway, they do a lot of fireworks. We go because it's tradition. I don't really like fireworks. It's crowds and it's a lot of traffic. I go for traditional purposes because my in-laws go. But I really don't have, like I was saying earlier, I don't have an emotional pull. I have a hard time. I've always had the hard time with loving one's country. I prefer it. I choose it. I like to live here. It's pragmatic because this happens to line up with the idea I have for what I'd like to see out of a government and what I'd like to see, generally speaking. It's not perfect. It's just what I like most. But I've never had an emotional pull. I've had an emotional pull for some of the idealism, the potential. However, the reality of it, I just have never had a emotional pull. So whether it's been around for 250 years or 260 years, I acknowledge there's never been a longer constitutional republic. I don't think in the history of time. I think there's a couple of, I think Switzerland, I believe, Argentina. I don't know if you want to count the Roman Empire. So, we've lasted longer, and I applaud that. I applaud that regardless of the cracks in the armor, we've managed to keep it together. For those of the naysayers, on my side, to think it's the end of the world, it's probably not. It's the end of the world as we knew it. I mean, but that happens every generation. I think after Vietnam, there was a reckoning. I think after, the world wars, we rethought about our place in the world. After the Civil War, I mean, you just go back in the country gathers up where have we been, where are we going? And so this is just another one of those periods of time. I do not think that the end is nigh, but I do think that it is important to figure out, is this the best it's going to be? Are we happy with that? If not, I hope we don't stand on our laurels and say this is good enough. Let's have a party. But really, we're looking at where do we start? How far have we come? And how can we keep moving forward? Because if we can't be moving forward, then we have come to the end. That's the only thing that's going to kill us. Much like they say with sharks, is if you stop swimming, that's when you die. So, if we say this is good enough, we're right where we want to be, then yeah, we will die. This will be the end of it. I don't think we're there yet. I'm at least a little optimistic that we can still move forward now.
This show is all about a little optimism, so I appreciate that, Steve. So let me add to that then, because I think that's apt that you would say, there's a sense in which it's probably wrong to just blindly celebrate as if there is no work to be done to help restore the republic, to further pursue the mission of all men are created equal, to make sure that the republic endures. But I am much like an improv. I'm a yes and person. I am all about blowing things up and eating fatty foods, as I mentioned in the description of this. I'm not a huge fan of fireworks. I mostly have fond memories of gathering with family and friends and really good homemade ice cream. The fireworks are just kind of like a sideshow that you had to endure to get to all the good food and conversation. But I love the fact that all over this nation, there's going to be those sorts of gatherings. I think that's good and healthy and right and is appropriate to celebrate. I think it's also appropriate to do more than just blow things up and eat fatty food, right? And so I'm wondering what a way to, not so much a dour, say, like reflection, but what, in your view, and sorry, let me preface it by saying this too. I am of the opinion our 250th anniversary is an opportunity not on one day, July the 4th, but I'm hopeful we'll spend the entire year with some sort of a reckoning process, some sort of a cultivation of what does it even mean to be part of this great American experiment that's still ongoing. And Steve, as you rightly mentioned, has been successful as a republic for longer than any other nation state ever attempted it. And so to that end, what would you guys say is another form of, let's call it celebration, besides just the having fun and the gathering of family, as important as those things are, an appropriate, let's say, activity that we could be engaged in, not just on the 4th, but perhaps all year round, that would make it to where this isn't just a gluttonous, frivolous, act of fun, but actually we're imbuing it with meaning and purpose and something deeper.
I think it's kind of going back to that, just remembering what the high principle was. Even if you're not going back to all men are created equal, remembering there's a high principle that's about more than the fireworks, like what you're saying. There is something that was supposed to be bigger than just prosperity, bigger than just conquest, bigger than just advance, bigger than just growth. There was something that this nation was actually founded on, which was a high ideal. And reflecting, if you can find some way of reflecting on that high ideal, there's been different times throughout American history, and July 4th kind of rings a bell to remind people to remember this thing, this high principle. There was a Frederick Douglass, the abolitionist in the 19th century, runaway slave, escaped slave, became a great abolitionist. He gave this real famous speech, I think it was in the early 1850s, at a church in, I think Corinth, New York. I can't remember the exact place, but it was on July 4th. And he asked, what does July 4th mean to the slave? And he's basically reminding people with this really strong rhetoric. I mean, it's a really powerful speech when you look at it. This powerful rhetoric reminding people, hey, we are not living up to the ideal. And whether you like it or not, there was a high ideal after that. 13, 14 years later, you've got Gettysburg, July 4th, and then Abraham Lincoln comes in with the Gettysburg Address, and it's a little while after the battle, but he's reminding people we have an ideal that we need to live up to. I think it's interesting how throughout American history, this day has kind of been a thing where we ring the bell and remind people, hey, there's a higher thing to live for. There's a higher thing we need to reflect on here. And it kind of recalibrates, like a chiropractor, kind of recalibrates the country, right? If you're willing to be recalibrated. And I think that's a healthy thing to do for all of us.
Mm-hmm. It hasn't been very long since South Carolina had a runoff primary election. And so, like, one of the things I've been thinking about this 4th of July is I took my oldest kid with me to go vote in that runoff, and said, like, hey, look, these are our neighbors. They're volunteering, right? Like, they're running the elections. These are the people who make sure we get to vote. Nobody pays them. And we made an agreement that he can volunteer starting when he's 16, I think, or maybe 17. And I said, I'll do it if you do it. So we have a pact. But to me, like, that's one of the best celebrations of our democracy, is like, this is something that we do together, and it's hodgepodge in many ways, right? Like, the federal government is huge and powerful and enormous, but the reality is that democracy is something that we are putting on with our neighbors all the time. And so when I give my parenting stump talk about the 4th of July, I probably will bring up the Frederick Douglass piece, but I'm also going to remind them about voting and voting volunteers.
Laura, I'm so happy to hear that. You actually read my mind. I was going to say, this may seem like a pretty basic 101 stuff for us, but I think far too many people don't exercise their voting rights. At least in the primaries, that's for sure. Primary voter turnout is still pretty abysmal. It's like 15 to 20%. And I get that a lot of that might be disenfranchised independents who are just turned off by the party, so they don't even want to participate in the primary process. But that's just never made any sense to me, because if you're leaving it strictly up to the partisans, guess what? Partisans are going to nominate partisans. And then you're just as miserable when you have your two crappy choices come November, right? So I believe the stat was, for all the news that the Democratic Socialists of America made in New York, was it a week or so ago? I think it was something like 7.5% of the New York voting population ended up nominating those candidates. I mean, that's, again, this is just basic civics 101 stuff. So I think something you could do to celebrate America all year round is to do exactly what Laura did. Not only participate in the democratic process, but to get your kids involved with that. I think that's so awesome to hear. The only other thing I could add is, again, you shouldn't have to wait for one day out of the year to learn about, the country's founding or the country's history. I think you should be educating yourself on that year round, whether you're reading books, whether you're watching. I can recommend tons of stuff. Ken Burns did he released his documentary on the American Revolution last November. Finally got around to it. It's awesome. I'm working my way now through Netflix's The American Experiment. They kind of covered the same stuff, but they have a lot of different people, both Democrats and Republicans, participating in on that, which is pretty cool. It's you shouldn't have to, you should only have to do this one day out of the year. It should be a constant thing, year round, decade round. Never stop learning about your country's history, and never stop participating in the democratic process that so many countless people have, fought and died for to protect that right for us.
Yeah, my daughter was just telling me tonight she's volunteering in the August primaries as well as a counter, do whatever basically they ask her to do. Hopefully fighting off hooligans in the parking lot. I can only hope. But I think primary is a lot like jury duties, that people complain about the process and they never get in charge. They try to figure out ways of getting out of the process. They talk about the justice system, but then they try to get out of jury duty. They talk about, I hate who these two people are I'm stuck with. Well, where were you in the summertime? And I've worked for candidates that we've knocked on lots of doors in the summertime. There's two, for those of us who worked in politics, there's 2 elections every year, at least. There's 3 if you count, actually 3 for mail-in, because so there's 3 different really mini elections you're working every year. And when you're starting in May, you're working up until August 3rd, 4th, 5th for those primary voters. You're putting the work, you're getting to them more often than you're getting into them in the fall, and they're still not showing up. So you can go, you can tell them about the promised land, describe the promised land, let them know what it holds for them. But then we still run into this whole thing where people still just aren't showing up. And I mean, I guess we can go back to, all right, our civics classes really serving our communities? No. Are we teaching too much about, are we spending too much time in high school talking about this and that, the other thing, but not talking about how your government works? Probably. But the whole reason that is because the people don't want it. Otherwise, you'd see it. You'd see boards of education influenced by the public if the public really wanted it. But, our schools serve what the public thinks they want, and the media serves what the public thinks they want. And so how do we go about, and I haven't figured it out, if you all have the answers, that's fantastic, but really getting people to understand, if you want to have a say, you got to show up. And if you don't show up, shut up. But how do we get that across?
John, I'm holding out hope that the continuous disgust I have with each subsequent ballot is just that I've finally become an old cranky conservative, and I'm just going to get crankier. And it's not that the world's getting worse; it's just I'm seeing it as worse. But yeah, I still vote, but it is harder with the choices we have. But I take your point. That in and of itself is no reason to simply not vote. I'm kind of calling an audible here, because it just occurred to me, for those of you with kids. I do not have kids, but I think everybody else on the call does. And this is made somewhat a repeat of your same response, but I want to give you an opportunity. What would you speak to other parents as far as like challenges or opportunities to impress upon this next generation, your children in particular, who you presumably would have the most impact over, what it means to be an American, how to participate? I mean, you've already said some things about what you want them participated in, but what hurdles are there? Is it easy? Is it difficult? Is it? Some of it could just be that kids probably could care less half the time. But I want you to speak to that for those parents out there listening. How would you encourage them to get their children involved in learning why this is important?
Well, I think it starts with treating them, I don't want to say treating them like adults younger, but having the same conversations you would have with them. Don't wait till they're 15 or 16, or they're going to turn 18. And so, okay, let's have the talk, the political version of the talk. It means when they're 8, when they're 7, you shape the language differently, but it's still there. Kind of like for those of us who have a faith tradition, you don't not talk about your faith when they're 25 and they can stomach it, right? You talk about whatever the version of a 4-year-old can understand. I think it's the same with politics. It's the same with, there are children's books out there about whomever, right? There's children's book out there about people in history, political figures in history. It's simplified, but it doesn't have to give the whole story. It just has to make them interested. And I think if we start earlier on, treating our children like they're going to be adults, and having conversations with them about what what would you like to see our neighborhood look like? What would you like to see our country look like when they're 7 and 8 years old? See what kind of answers you get. But instill in them that people are asking me what I think, or people, damn it, should be asking me what I think. And if they're not asking me, I should tell them what I think, even if it's ridiculous, even if it's, you know what, for those of us with kids who are in college, it's like there's some crazy stuff that comes home, but it's okay because it is a curious and active mind that comes home with that stuff, and it changes all the time. But I think that is where it starts, is treating them like sponges earlier on and realizing they are capable of at least understanding. So, political thought, difficult. How you feel about it, simple, right? The principles are simpler than we think. The virtues are simpler. Honesty, integrity. How does it make you feel if your parents lied to you? Not so good. You know, it's like we can talk about those emotions early on, and then that blossoms, I think, into a, what do I want to see in the people who I elect, or do I want to be elected? Is this something I want to do? And you get more people getting out there earlier on saying, I can make a difference. I should make a difference. I'm going to make a difference.
You know, Josh, I want to like twist your question ever so slightly, because I actually wrote about something on my How to Human Substack not long ago that I feel like kind of captures this dynamic. So what I was talking about is the fact that like I try to teach my kids principles, and like so often they bring them back to me and they're like, well, you said this. And so inevitably they're being used against me, right? I'm like, well, you know, you have bodily autonomy. And they're like, cool, I'm not going to brush my hair. And I'm just like, wow, I am so proud right now. But the point that I think is like, is so powerful, and it relates to Steve's point about treating kids like, you know, taking them very seriously, and talking to them about these ideas from the beginning. I think that's kind of the parallel with what citizens have done with the Declaration over the course of our history, right? Is that they brought it back to the framers and back to the nation as, you know, as an entity, and said, but you said this and you're doing something else, right? And so I think like that sort of continual like reapproaching and saying, like, well, if these are your values, like, are you doing them? That's a conversation that we have in my home and our family. And I hope that what it is imparting to them is that it's also a conversation that like we as citizens continue to have with each other and with our government.
I like that, Laura. I was going to say don't start with the polarization. Start with the values and the principles like that. I totally agree with that. And I think the best thing to do is, I don't want my kids to mimic my vote. I want them to my hope is that they'll carry the same values that were in the home they grew up in, and maybe even improve upon it, you know, as they go out there. And so rather than telling them this is what you do, what do you think about this? Where do you find the values in this candidate or this issue? What do you, and so asking questions rather than talking at them. Now, all of my kids are now grown up. They're all adults now. Most of them are married, but I'm seeing the fruit of that. And it seems to make for a lot more of a peaceful generation in a polarized age to me.
While my boy's only 16 months old, my wife has quite a few nieces and nephews. And I vividly remember last year we were driving them home on the 4th of July after a big party. And they were about maybe 7 to 11 in age, right about there. And, you know, all of a sudden I just started talking to them. I was like, hey, kids, I'm just curious. What do you think it means to be an American? And they're like, you were born in America? And I'm like, yes, but what else does it mean? You know, and, you know, they really didn't, you know, give it much thought beyond that. And so my wife and I were trying our best to explain what it is to be an American. And, you know, you start with small examples they can relate to. So for instance, one of my wife's brother-in-laws is Ecuadorian, and they had just come back from a trip to Ecuador. And the boy who was with us, you know, he's hearing us talk about America and what it's like. And he goes, you know, when I was in Ecuador, they didn't have Pop-Tarts. And I'm like, that's right. They didn't have Pop-Tarts. And, you know, you use that to explain, you know, why there are like lots of options here, why there are lots of things on the shelf here. I mean, I wasn't, you know, giving them the you know, in the weeds explanation about free market economics or, you know, Milton Friedman theory or anything like that. But, you know, you start with examples they can relate to and that they can understand, and you work your way up from there.
I'm with you, John. I have lots of nieces and nephews, and I often quiz them about the American founding because I am the cool uncle. I wanted to reflect a moment. You know, we mentioned the Gettysburg Address, some other Frederick Douglass, some wonderful speeches. You could probably put up there Washington's farewell address. You could put up there Martin Luther King's "I Had a Dream." One, in my opinion, of the greatest speeches in American history came 100 years ago with former President Calvin Coolidge. I won't quote the whole thing. I would encourage listeners, if you've not heard of this, to go look it up.
I'm intrigued.
He talked about that essentially the American experiment was a finality to it. It is, if all men are created equal, he said, that is final. You don't improve upon that. You can only go backwards. You can realize it more fully, but you can't progress beyond it. And I think embedded within that is a sort of anchoring that I think is incredibly important and helpful. In the same way that, say, you know, some of these speeches just really speak to us as Americans and kind of capsulate, oh, okay, that makes sense now. So yeah, I definitely encourage the listener rather, to go read that speech.
Sorry, Josh, if I may, one of my favorite quotes from Coolidge of that speech is, "To live under the American Constitution is the greatest political privilege that was ever accorded to the human race." Amen to that.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, every word of that speech is amazing. But on the 4th of July in the evening, of course, Donald Trump is going to address the nation. Are we going to witness yet another landmark American speech?
You know, I have to say, man, you know, when Trump won in 24, I had a lot of conservative friends who were, I mean, honest to God, one of the first thoughts that ran through their head was, man, this is going to be, you know, at least the Republicans will be in charge for 250. So that's going to be a hell of a celebration. I have to tell you, I'm a little disappointed. I mean, you know, they had a year and a half to prepare for this. And, you know, first of all, the first slate they rolled out was nothing impressive. I mean, maybe if you were doing it in 1991, it would have been. But, you know, I think Vanilla Ice and Milli Vanilli have had their heyday. And then they just kind of scrapped the whole thing and just decided to do a campaign rally as if that was going to be a big treat. So, you know, I got to tell you, and again, I'm an R voter, but I was really disappointed. Yeah, like I really thought they were going to come up with something better than that. So, you know, I mean, are we going to get you know, a Coolidge-esque or Washingtonian type speech from Trump? I highly doubt it. You know, the only thing I could think of is I remember earlier this year when we were when my wife and I were Googling, like, what is the 250th called? Is it it's not the centennial, it's so we were Googling it, and you know, the AI answer was it's officially the Semiquincentennial, also known as the Sestercentennial, also known as, quote, the big 250. And right away I just go, you know, I could just see Trump going, you know what, we're going to go with the big 250. I like that. That sounds, you know what, that makes a lot of, I don't think I can even say the other two words. So it's the big 250. I don't think we're going to get much more than that, you know, come Saturday night, but I guess we'll find out.
I would say it's met expectations so far.
And that isn't even something everybody has to weigh in on. I just wanted to get one dig in, I suppose. But I don't want to close with that. Let me give everyone an opportunity to kind of close
Thank
here.
you.
I don't have, yes, exactly, because this is not in any way intended to be a dig at anyone conversation. I'm just going to leave this open ended, just a room for final thoughts. It's our 250th. What would you want to leave the viewer or the listener with?
Here's my suggestion, and this is something we've done recently. Listen to Aaron Copland's Fanfare for the Common Man. We were listening to it in the car the other day and talking about what a fanfare is for, that it announces the arrival of somebody or an army or a monarch. but that we don't have that. And instead, it's this very regal piece of music that celebrates that, we are all created equal in this country. And there's something very, as we've said, I think in this hour, that's something that we continue to aspire to and we've fallen short of. So if you'd like to maybe come back to a sense that you and your fellow citizens are imbued with dignity, and that's something we can aspire to as both individuals and a country, then that's my listening recommendation for the 250.
I would say think of a way that you can positively contribute to the next 250. Otherwise, we won't get close to getting there. Because I think, if we were just saying earlier, vote in the primaries, join a local campaign, get involved, whatever that looks like, become a volunteer. If you're not positively contributing to what's happening in your community, and, if you want to look at your community as your neighborhood or your state or the East Coast or West Coast or the country as a whole or mankind as a whole, I don't think there's a wrong answer. I think there's room for all of it. I think it's just as fine to look at your neighborhood as to look at how can I contribute to humankind overall. But I think if you're not figuring out how you can positively contribute, we don't have to worry about the next 250 because we won't get close to getting there.
The Bible talks about stirring yourself to good works. I would take any of those speeches that have been mentioned, any of those big icon moments, go look at them. Go read over one of the speeches. Take some time just to silence the noise, consider it, and think about, like, what can I do to just remember the high mark, remember the high ideal in my life, what my home's about.
I echo all the above, and not to do a little shameless plug here, but again, the column I wrote to remind everyone, why America is still the greatest nation on earth. I'll just give you the quick bullet points, the top 10 reasons. Still the land of opportunity, capitalism, and upward mobility, our Constitution and foundational freedoms. Still lead the world in global innovation, technology, and the entrepreneurial spirit, financial and investment capital of the world. Our culture of philanthropy and generosity, world-class higher education, elite military strength, a continued nation of legal immigration, American soft power and cultural influence throughout the globe is unparalleled. And the number one reason, it's people. We're a melting pot of all races, ethnicities, and backgrounds. And all those things are our biggest strengths.
You're muted, Josh.
Sorry about that. I was going to ask John, where can they find that column?
Fair enough. It's on my Substack, John Giocaris, Giokaris Substack. It's actually the first thing I've ever published on Substack, so it should be pretty easy to find.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to leave it with that. I don't think I can improve upon, much like Calvin Coolidge said, I cannot improve upon these principles. So Laura, John, JB, and Steve, thank you guys so much for joining us. Thank everyone for watching, and I hope everyone out there has a safe and enjoyable 4th of July. Happy Independence Day, everyone.